seemed clear enough to me, but it's a mystery untold. There are things you can't foresee and know. All the time you spend in love, thinking love will keep you still. Is the speed the same below as above? I know what I know is not enough. Here below, as we're spinning in the dust, spinning in the dust. Now I'll watch you when you sleep, see the grace of all the years, and the life that runs so deep and clear. Was it easy when we met? Was the winter cold? Do we always just forget the fall? Don't know what I know is not enough. Here below, as we're spinning in the dust, spinning in the dust. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, it's a mystery untold. It seems clear to me. Just forget the fall, mystery untold. shy, stand up straight, here it comes. Say goodbye, don't you cry, hold yourself, don't forget you are strong. Move along, nothing's wrong feeling alone. Heal your mind, heal your soul, kiss goodbye, don't you fall, love yourself, no regrets, don't you cry, don't forget you are strong. Move along, nothing is wrong. Every morning I say these words to cope and clean all my thoughts, it works. I laugh, I sing, I do my thing, a bird with none in Lego scene, it works. Love yourself, leave yourself, watch yourself, tease yourself. Here it comes, here it goes, do survive, don't you fall. Think about now, not about tomorrow. Nothing is wrong. Every morning I say these words to cope and clean all my thoughts, it works. I laugh, I sing, I do my thing, a bird with none in Lego scene, it works. Every morning I say these words to cope and clean all my thoughts, it works. I laugh, I sing, I do my thing, a bird with none in Lego scene, it works.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Return to Zero post-discussion Google Hangout that I myself, Carly Marie Dudley, and my beautiful friend Carrie Fisher-Pascual from the Still Project will be hosting today. We are joined by some very beautiful women that Carrie will introduce in a moment. But first of all, I just wanted to welcome everyone who is joining us from across America, and possibly we have a few viewers from around the world as well. You've probably all just watched this amazing film, and you're probably all going through a whole world of emotions right now. And that was the main purpose of us to have this discussion today, and that's so that we can go through the movie together and what it has brought up with for us. I know myself, I watched the film at the premiere, so I had a lot of people to turn to after watching the film, but I imagine that there are a lot of people out there tonight in their homes feeling very alone, and so we wanted to put this together for you all to have this discussion. So I'd like to hand it over to Carrie now, so she can introduce our beautiful panel of ladies. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carly. Yes, I think when people started to find out that we were doing this particular hangout, it was most important and really a well-received idea, because this movie does bring up so many different emotions, and you're right, whether it's a loss that has happened, years ago. I mean, in my case, it's been 12 years. For many people who might be watching, it's a little more fresh. And I think there's just a range of things that come up, and that's really what we want to talk about today. So I am so pleased to welcome our guests today. We have Cath Duncan, with us who has worked directly with Sean Hanish, the director of Return to Zero, in coming up with the Return to Zero discussion guide. And it's something that's readily available on the Return to Zero website. That can be downloaded, and we're going to be going over some of the details of that and how that came to be. But Cath, first I wanted to ask you if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with Return to Zero.
Great. Well, I first want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this, because, you know, I'm really excited about the impact that this movie and all of the projects around it and the community, the sense of community that's already building around it. I'm just excited about the difference that that can make for people. And it's great to be a part of that. So I'm a social worker, and my work all focuses on grief support. I've been focusing on grief support exclusively for the past 4 years or so, and have a variety of projects that are about that grief support, and also training, helping professionals who work with bereaved families. But you know, that's some of my professional journey. What really brought me to doing this kind of work was, I think, same as the rest of you who are on this call, you know, all four of us, our own hell and back journeys of our own grief and loss, and that's very much what I draw on in my own work. You know, our experiences in our family of loss have included, in our first pregnancy, our baby died in the second trimester, died in utero, and we had a second pregnancy that we lost through early miscarriage as well. And subsequent to that, learned that really the risks of becoming pregnant again were too great for me, for my health. And so found ourselves also grieving the loss of that opportunity to carry a biological child full term, and birth a biological child. And we've since adopted a beautiful boy who's just the delight of our lives. But those three losses there were three very different kinds of losses for us that we had to grieve, and all difficult in their own way. And so yeah, I draw on that a lot in my work. You know, I think that there are things that reading about grief, just, you know, there are things that we learn in living our grief and in walking with others who are living their grief that we can only learn that way and wouldn't be able to pick up through, you know, reading books about grief.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a whole other level of understanding and intuition, and there's so much more that comes to it. So we just thank you again for being here with us to have this discussion today. And I also want to introduce Dr. Carla Iacampo, who is, she's the real face behind the character Dr. Claire in the film. And so Carla, if you would kind of tell us a little bit about your journey, your story, and how you got involved with Return to Zero.
So I'm an OBGYN, and I guess professionally, I have been in practice for 20 plus years, and have unfortunately had patients who've been through what we've been through. I've also had it happen in my life. Our third daughter was stillborn at about 28 weeks. That was about 18 and a half years ago. And like you say, even, but sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's recent, sometimes it's far. There are times when it feels like it was just not very long ago, and other times when I think, oh my God, she would be almost 19. I met Sean and Kylie right after, just like in the movie, right after they lost their baby.
and shared with them what had happened with us, and a lot of the conversation that he put into the movie is actually pretty close to our actual conversation. After, oh God, it was maybe 4 years ago, he sent me an email and he said, "Can you look at this screenplay that I've written?" And I said, "Sure," not really realizing, I didn't even know what he did for a living. I just know that he was Kylie's husband. And so when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, because I don't know about you guys and the women that you've talked to, I can just go on my own experience, but for me, it happens the same way every time. And even with my own, you know, I was out of town, I was at a meeting, and baby hadn't moved, and I called a friend who I knew, or a guy I grew up with who was in practice in that town, and I said, "Can I just drop in your labor and delivery and hear the heartbeat?" And you know, they try this monitor, then they try this monitor, and it doesn't work, and I'm like, "Bring me the ultrasound," and sure enough, that's what it was, and he kind of wrote that in, and I've seen it, unfortunately, too many times to feel like it always seems to happen that way. So then he said, "Well, what would you change? Does this sound like what a doctor would say?" And I said, it's pretty much right on. And there was just a few things, but he had written it so beautifully and with some humor and a lot of fact and a heart that it was just too much to not get involved in. And so then when he was actually putting it together, he asked if I would come and be present when they were doing labor and delivery scenes, and they ended up actually using our office to do their in-office scenes, and we had the fortune of being able to be on the set when they were shooting the deliveries of both the dark day and the happy day, and it was pretty awesome to be involved with them.
Well, I have to say, when we were talking earlier at our earlier hangout, Sean brought up that, you know, yes, this is one story, and it happens to be their story, but it is also your story too. Mm-hmm. And I think that brings an incredible amount of depth to it. So we're just really thankful and honored to have you with us today. I do want to jump into talking about the discussion guide, because I think we can all agree how important it is to have a resource like that for the people to access after watching the film, because it may be difficult to deal with all of the things that come to the surface. You know, that maybe for some of us, those are feelings we don't deal with on a daily basis anymore, but then watching something like that really kind of brings that up. So, Cath, I just want to kind of turn it over to you, and if you could help us understand sort of how you went through the journey of writing the discussion guide, and talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. You know, I remember when I first learned about the film, and I had a chat with Sean about the film. I hadn't seen the film yet, and we talked about this bigger vision that he had, really, for education, for advocacy, for the film to be like a tool for transformation. And I was really excited about that. And when he was using phrases like breaking the silence, that particularly interested me, because I'm very interested in the role that shame plays in our grieving, and I think that silence is something that can really tend to build shame into the grief experience. And so, you know, we talked about how this was a conversation that was being opened, and it's a brave conversation. I think it's courageous for anyone to participate in the conversation about stillbirth, about child death, whether you've experienced the death of your own child or not. I think it takes some degree of courage to watch the film and be willing to have emotions evoked and to think through the reality of that appalling situation when a child dies. And what I loved about Sean was that he really had a sense of responsibility about, if we're going to open the conversation, how do we ensure that this is going to be a conversation that goes in the direction of togetherness, of transformation, of helping people, of serving this community, of people who are bereaved and the people who are important to them. And so the guide came out of that discussion of wanting to offer questions that would help people who were sitting with a lot of memories, a lot of emotions that had been evoked in the film, and to guide people with directions for having what's quite a difficult conversation, whether it's an internal conversation with themselves or perhaps a sacred conversation with their baby or their child that has died. We have those too, and or whether it's conversations with friends and family who are important to us and who we want to have with us for that grief journey. So, one of the things that I thought about that was the first thing that came to mind in thinking through what to build into the guide is, I don't think that bereaved people need more information and advice about how to grieve. We've been given 5 stages and 4 tasks, and do the grief work, and it all starts to sound like this to-do list for exhausted grieving people is longer and longer, with more and more ideas and books that come out about grief, and there are a lot of shoulds and shouldn'ts that we get told and that we talk about, all well-meaning, in the hopes of helping us in a difficult journey. But it's a lot. It's a ton of advice, and it can leave you feeling like, it's confusing because one person says, I'm not crying enough, and maybe it's denial, and I'm not doing grieving right, and then the next person is, you're crying too much, you need to move on, and so we have these confusing messages that we get, we have to deal with alongside the grief that's difficult enough. So I didn't want it to be about, here's a bunch of advice, here's a bunch of things to add to your to-do list. I wanted it to be about questions, because I believe that grieving is natural and healthy. We grieve because we love. We know how to do it. It's perfectly healthy. It's not an illness to grieve, in spite of all the medical language we often use around it and make it sound like it's something to be cured or fixed. It's just another expression of love. It's love in another form. And I wanted to offer questions that would help people to come home to their own wisdom, their own resilience, their own resourcefulness, questions that would tap into their unique story. Sean's had the difficult task of sort of picking a story, because you can only tell one story in this kind of movie. And so there'll be people who'll be watching, and perhaps their story diverges a little bit from what happens in the film. I know that our experiences with helping professionals, for example, sometimes vary quite greatly and have a big impact on how we experience our grief. And so I wanted to find that balance of, on the one hand, questions that would help to bring forward people's unique story, because it is about a unique story and a unique child that died. There's only that child once in the world. There's never going to be that child again. And so the significance of their individuality is important. But I also wanted to offer questions that would bring forward some of that universal stuff that you were talking about, Carla, where we see these themes happen over and over again. I think Sean did a good job of that in the film, sort of showing some of the decisions that bereaved parents are faced with when they find out that their child has died, and they feel really appalling at the time to contemplate, burial or cremation, or am I going to hold my child or not? Am I going to take photos or not? And so I've thought through questions that would help to highlight that commonality, as well as give the opportunity to tap into people's individual, personal, varied grief experiences. And I think that commonality is so important, because when we discover the ways that our journey is similar to what other people are struggling with, other people who've experienced grief or the death of a child, there's something very helpful about that. I think it leaves us feeling less alone, less likely to feel shame about our experience and sort of criticize ourselves for the things we find difficult on that journey, because we see that actually this is very natural considering what we've experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you maybe, for the viewers that are watching now, if you want to have a look at the discussion guide, you can go to the Return to Zero website at www.returntozerothemovie.com. And it's in there, the discussion guide. You can download it. It's a PDF and you can go through it. But maybe for the people who are going to do that afterwards, maybe Cath, if you could just cover some of the issues that are in the actual guide.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that I thought about is, when we hear the word stillbirth, and we know the movie's about stillbirth, I think a lot of the time we immediately go to think, oh, this is all about death. And I wanted the guide to be not primarily about death, but primarily about relationships. We grieve because we feel deep love for our children who have died, and death doesn't end that relationship. The relationship continues, as we see Maggie discovering in the movie. And so, some of the questions in the guide are really geared at helping people to explore what is that relationship, what has it been about for people, how have they been changed by the fact that their child lived and the fact that their child died, how do they want to carry their children forward and remember them, how do they want to nurture that connection, and what are their preferences for ways of doing that now. And not just relationships with our deceased children, but also our relationships with the living. Those are important. They have a huge impact on how we experience our grief journey. How do the people around us interact with us around our grief journey? What has been helpful? What has been less helpful? Even hurtful? Where do we draw support in terms of our social resources? So really helping people to tap into that. Another thing that I thought about that felt important, and you'll see questions relating to this in the guide, is what sustains us in our grief journey. Grief is hard, and when a child dies, a lot is lost, and a lot remains. And depending on where you are in your grief journey, we often find that not just that a lot that's important to us remains, but like with Aaron and Maggie in the movie, we're sometimes very often changed by our grief in ways that we quite like. We very often find that we prefer some aspects of ourselves that has come forward. Some of the ways our values perhaps have shifted, our priorities have shifted as a result of our grief experiences. I often hear bereaved parents talking about how they parent differently, and we see Aaron prioritizing family over work, for example, in the movie. And so, grief is hard. We need things to sustain us, and all of us are here today able to watch the movie because we have had things that have sustained us through our grief. however hard that journey is, even if we're still really in the early days, we're there because we have some things in our lives that are sustaining us. So whether it's personal character strengths that we draw on inside that sustain us, whether it's important relationships in our lives that sustain us, whether it's various kinds of skills for reflection and thinking through our stories, changing how we're thinking about things. You know, there are various things that sustain us, and so a lot of the questions, you know, are focused on bringing that forward, helping people to connect with that resilience that's in them, because when we're conscious about those places of resilience, we can nurture it, and that's really helpful in a tough journey.
Definitely. I just wanted to jump in and say one of the issues specifically in the guide that spoke to me is in talking about, there's a line from the film, the thing no one tells you about is the relationship that begins with them after they die. And I think for a lot of people, they want to look at somebody in a grieving situation and think, okay, when is this going to be wrapped up? And there's actually a whole other door that opens and a brand new relationship that begins after the child dies. So Dr. Karla, I wanted to kind of throw that over to you. I know that being someone who works, with families all the time, being an OBGYN, you're delivering babies all the time, and I'm sure that you're going through some of these experiences with your patients, just like you did, with Sean and Kylie. What can you tell us about the experience that begins after the child dies?
I would say from a personal point of view, like when I'm counseling other women, it's more something that you don't get over it. You just start walking through it. And and I think personally, when I was in my very early stages of going through it, I think if I had to guess, it felt like people just generally gave you about 6 or 8 weeks. And then at that point, they were on with their life, but you were left still totally in a very dark place. I mean, I'm not saying it was always dark, but it's like it's like the two-step. You go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and at one moment you're laughing and you feel like you're normal, whatever that is, and then all of a sudden you think this unbelievable loss just happened to me, and so when I'm talking to women, I'm like, that's so normal. You will unbelievably, you will get joy back in your life. You might not feel that way right now, but it will come. I try to give as many resources to them as I can. When it happens in my hospital or in my office, we have a really great program there with social work. We have really great therapists who are very helpful with grief, and kind of like with Cath, that's their mission, is to help people with grief, whether it's early pregnancy loss, late pregnancy loss, or fertility issues. And so I'm fortunate to have that. I would say teaching people or telling people or trying to share with them that we all grieve differently. I grieved differently than my husband, who grieved differently than my parents, who grieved differently than our children. And it was all age appropriate. I personally knew 2 weeks later I had to go back to work and be ready to deliver babies again, and that was probably the hardest part. Was not to let my personal get in the way of that. So I guess I'm not being very brief, but the answer is just to let people know that their path is going to be different from mine. It's going to be different than yours, and then it's going to go up and down, and that there are going to be people who don't know what to say, and we have to somehow let them know that really all they need to say is we're sorry for your loss. And what I would tell people, if they look like they were going forward, it's like that's plenty. That's all I needed to hear.
Yeah, no, I definitely, and everybody grieving differently, and each one of those situations, each one of those people, it's appropriate to them. And I think that's what a lot of people need to be able to accept about their own journey, is whatever it is that you need, it's appropriate to you.
Yes.
And I think that's really what you're saying. Carly, did you have something that you wanted to add there?
I think for me, when I first read the guide, I had no idea that it had been written, and I was so thankful because it made me really think about my own experience. And just watching the movie alone, it wasn't exactly my story, and I loved that as well, because I think that this story is just one in millions, and we really have to honor that and accept that our story is different to many other people's, and we have to be willing to accept that our story is different to other people, and that's okay. This is, the story was raw and it was real, and I think that, for me to go through the discussion guide, it helped me to remember certain parts of my journey, and to actually explore different parts of my grief that I don't think I've actually even been to. So I think it's a really wonderful thing to go through, especially for people who are watching tonight, who are who are probably feeling a whole world of emotions. So yeah, I think it's wonderful, and I think I've seen some of the conversations already on the Return to Zero Facebook page, and this film, whether you liked it or not, it's already won. It's done its work. It's already working. People are saying, like, I saw a conversation on there about from a health professional saying that she would never in a million years even put a baby into a box, But this is what is actually happening. This is happening in hospitals around the world. Babies are being put into cardboard boxes, and while that's horrifying to us, this is happening, and this is why it's important that we have these hard conversations with our families, with our loved ones, with our health professionals, and just with each other, because if we can't tell hard stories and we can't tell these truthful stories, then what is the point? There's no point in sugarcoating this. We have to be honest and real and raw about it for there to be any sort of difference, and not just in the outer community, but for ourselves. So I'll jump if you want to jump in, Carrie.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to commend you, Cath, on how comprehensive the guide is, and I thought I would just kind of quickly let people know. I mean, I'm just leafing through the copy that I have here, but I love that you take it all the way from the very beginning of life, the moment that you find out that you're pregnant, and going through to the moment of trauma. That's when you find out that there is something wrong, and that's immediately a trauma. And then navigating that grief journey, which, as Dr. Karla said, is different for everyone.
For sure.
And then also, getting into the what it's like going out, leaving the house, going back out into your life again. I mean, Karla, you mentioned knowing that you're going to have to go back out and deliver babies again. That's beyond me. It's beyond my comprehension. And getting past that and dealing with your own personal remembering and making your child part of the family, eternally. So there's so much in the guide, and I just want to encourage everybody to go to the Return to Zero website and download it, because I think what you'll find is that it can be used individually, almost as a journal for yourself. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to be able to go through with your own thoughts and your own feelings at your own pace, and take it section by section, and and go through those things, or with your spouse or significant other, or maybe with your grief support group, it's also something I think that can be used as training, you know, for physicians and people in the medical community. I think it's such an incredible resource, and that's one of the things I wanted to come back to you, Karla, for is I know that people watching Return to Zero um, are going to look at Dr. Claire and say, wow, I wish I had that experience with my doctor, you know, because we have, with the Still Project, we've interviewed a number of people, and, you know, just in the past 12 years since our own experience, we've connected with so many families all over the world, and unfortunately there are a lot of negative experiences. And so I think that there's a lot to offer to the medical community, and I'm wondering from you, you know, what kind of needs do you see in the medical community to deal with these kind of losses?
I feel very fortunate that basically the two places that I've worked in my career, my training place and where I went into practice, have both been very forward-thinking in the grief process. And so it was kind of shocking to me actually that other people didn't have that experience. When the movie premiered in Rome, there were quite a few people there who, in that country, it sounds like it is even worse than what Sean and Kylie experienced at the beginning of the movie. They just don't know, and they're like, you can do this again, and it kind of maybe like it was here 50 years ago or something. Whereas I think now we acknowledge that life, no matter how brief, no matter intrauterine, extrauterine, and really try to acknowledge to the world and to that family that honestly, as soon as you find out you're pregnant, that baby is a baby, and it doesn't matter if it went to full term, if it was in the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. That loss is profound, and I think that for us in the medical profession, particularly in labor and delivery, whether we're nurses, anesthesia, social workers, physicians, or the ministry who comes to help these families when they're in-house or afterwards when they go home and they're shattered and need help, that they really learn through this movie, through this workbook resource, that that words mean a lot, and people don't. I don't think they don't filter as well as we could, and I think we just took a breath and think about what we would want to hear if it had happened to us, and it did happen to us, but if we were an outside person trying to support the person who's going through it, that they would probably say something different, that they would try to be more just present. I think most people need somebody to be present and to allow these bereaved parents to just talk, or to just be, instead of feeling like they have to get over it and be in the world. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah, I think so as well, Cath. Sorry, Karla. One thing that I wanted to say was that you must have been. It must be such a credit to you to be portrayed in the way that you were, and you know, you must feel so. I mean, I'm sure your family is so incredibly proud. I mean, I was blessed enough to have the most beautiful obstetrician look after myself and my husband when we lost our son. But I know that there's a lot of people out there that were not looked after in the care that you give to your patients. So, yeah, I think that it's so important that health professionals, you know, can see this film and see how to care for a family. And one thing that helped me to heal in my own experience was when my daughter was born after I lost my son, is that my obstetrician, she cried with me, you know, and I was so overwhelmed that she felt that it was safe to be like that, you know, and it was just so, I felt so cared for. But I think, yeah, I mean, the movie for me, there was a few triggers in it, obviously, as there will be for everyone. And one thing was just how lonely I felt at that time, and it was just my husband and I. And the scene where Minnie is wheeled through the hallway of the hospital, and it's her peering into the hospital rooms, and like I've just got, I've got chills now just thinking about it, because that's exactly how I felt, and I just felt so alone. And I remember, I remember one of the midwives coming in to greet us, and the first thing she said was, "I'm sorry for your loss." And I remember I did exactly what Minnie Driver did, and I put my hands over my head, because I was like, it was the first person to say, "I'm sorry for your loss," and he wasn't even born yet, So I think, there's a lot of, the wonderful thing about the movie is, you think you go, like for me, I think I'm doing well. I think I've explored all the areas of grief. I'm 7 years out now, and then I watch this film and think I haven't even thought of that, and it brings up all these amazing emotions. And like I said before in the previous Google Hangout to Sean and Kylie, is that this film is so healing for me, because when I watch it, I'm reminded of different moments of my own journey that I've previously forgotten. Like they've slipped my mind, and as much as some of those memories are difficult for me, it's the most precious time in my life. It was the time that I held my son. It's him. He's there, and if I could go back right now, I would experience that intense pain, because it would mean that I get to hold him, and I would get to be with him. And so as much as it's, like Minnie Driver says in the film, she says, I love the feeling, and it's so true. It really is. So I'm probably waffling on, but Carrie, did you want to add to anything?
I wanted to direct back to Cath, because I was talking earlier this evening to Sean about the DVD for Return to Zero, which is going to be coming out next month. And I told him, I said, I really see this discussion guide as a companion, a direct companion to the DVD, and ways that it can be used. So, Cath, I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how they might be used together.
Yes. So depending on who you have around you and how you feel about sharing your journey, I think one of the things about the guide is that it's flexible. It can be about a personal, private process of reflection, like you said, a journal kind of experience. It can be taken to your counselor for conversations with your counselor, for bereaved families who are working with a counselor around grief support. But what I would want to encourage people around is to consider the opportunities to connect with other people. Firstly, other people who have experienced the death of a child, connecting in that kind of community, and there's such a beautiful community that's developed around this movie, with a lot of in-person and online opportunities to connect with other bereaved families and share stories. And something I want to say about that sharing stories, just to give people a little tip, I think a worthy discussion, if you're getting together in groups to share your stories as bereaved families, is to talk about something that I call the hierarchy of loss. And I love that Sean addressed this in the movie with Maggie and her mum. That Maggie and her mum had that conversation about, stillbirth versus miscarriage, and Maggie's first reaction of, miscarriages in the stillbirth, as though it's so much worse, and her mum saying, well, this is my pain, and it's a very real pain for me, and and I can speak to that as well as someone who's had an early loss and a second trimester loss. There were different pains, but they were, they both gave me very difficult stuff to grieve. And so, sometimes when you hear people talking about their stories, when they get together and share their stories, there can be fears around, I don't want to share my story because I think maybe it's not as bad. My grief or my loss isn't as bad as someone else's, and we sort of invalidate ourselves, or other people invalidate us around, well, my baby died later or earlier, and it becomes a competition to see who's the biggest loser, and we all lose when we compete around something like that. We all become the biggest losers together. The worst loss is the one you have to live with, because that's what matters to you most. And so to encourage people that if you're getting together to share your stories, remember this this hierarchy of loss that sneaks in, and agree as a group that you're just going to abolish that idea of it's a myth that one grief is worse than another, and you're not going to be doing that comparison. You're going to just be allowing for each person to have their own unique story, and to grieve as much as they grieve or as little as they grieve. There's no competition, so that we can be in it together instead of I think the hierarchy of grief is, and the hierarchy of loss at least, is it's just such it becomes a cause of disconnection, and that's the opposite of what we want. Ultimately that place of togetherness is where the healing happens, I believe.
Yeah. Sorry.
Did you want to say something?
No, that's fine.
I was going to pop in. What I found was, you think you're so alone, even though, as he says, it happens in about 1 in 150, 1 in 160 births.
Yeah.
People came out of the woodwork who it had happened to after it happened to us. And that was shocking to me. And I'd been working for years when that happened. And, the preschool principal, a patient who was a long-term patient of mine, who then shared with me that was her story. It happened over and over again. And there were so many families out there who feel like they're the only ones that this is happening to, and they're grieving by themselves. And to have this open up this world, just after this movie, there have been so many different opportunities to be involved with bereaved parent groups in our city that I didn't even know existed until this. And I work in this type of medicine. I was stunned. So yeah, it's been eye-opening, from a personal and professional.
I completely agree with you. I mean, just in my own family, I found out so much about what my family has personally experienced with the loss of babies, and I had no idea until I had been through it myself. So one thing that I think is going to be so amazing, I mean, there's so much hype about this film for us as a community, but I think it has such a greater purpose than that. And for me, it is, I want this film to go out to hospitals, and even just so they can tell people when they leave the hospital, tell your friends and family to watch Return to Zero before they speak to you. Just ask them, and you can use your situation. You can say, in honor of my child, please watch Return to Zero. Learn a little bit about what I'm experiencing, and so they can see that classic scene where we go through, the 3 situations where the person has forgotten the loss, the people who want to avoid it, and then the people that want to push, with all their good intentions, they want to push their religious views onto you, which, in time might help, but at that time it rarely ever does. And so I think it's so valuable for the rest of society to get a glimpse into what we all experience, and I think that's invaluable. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I think I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Carly. When you said that to me recently, it was like a light bulb moment for me, because I automatically think, like I think a lot of people do, is where so many people feel alone and they feel like they don't have access to resources, so we're always thinking about what resources we can give to the mother and the father. But it hadn't occurred to me about what a valuable resource this film and even the discussion guide can be to the people surrounding the mother and the father of the baby, you know, and kind of like you said, you know, just give this to them and say, here, watch this, you know, before you approach them, or before you, to get a better understanding of what's going on with this family that you care about, you know, because it definitely will. And you know, along the lines of that, about Return to Zero now being out in the world, which I think is an incredible gift. I just wanted to kind of introduce our last question before we wrap up, for each of us that we can address, which is, now that Return to Zero is out there and this discussion guide is out there, what do we each hope to see happen? And what changes do we hope to see come? And Karla, would you like to address that first?
Great. You caught me off guard there. I hope that it allows people who have this unfortunate thing happen to them, and there are going to be people that it does happen to, that it allows them to normalize what the grief process is, and to know that it's different for everyone, and for them to know that there is a path, that is a journey. It's not going to be a fast one, but it is one that it'll get slowly better, little by little, and to give them hope. Because to me, that's what I took away from it, besides the horrible grief, was that there was hope that they would love again, that there would be something there for them again. And I know in the manual it talks about how, you know, everybody's path is going to be different, but I think for my wishes for people is that they come away from watching this family go through a very horrible thing, to come away with the feeling that somehow we will get through this, and we will hopefully retain our humanity and our love and our respect for each other, and we'll go on and feel like we have happiness, when at the time we just can't even get beyond the despair and the disbelief that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Cath, would you address that as well? What do you hope to see happen now that Return to Zero is out there?
You know, like I said earlier, I have a special interest in the role that shame plays in grief. Like, grief is hard enough without having shame in the mix. And you know, the definition of shame that I really like comes from Dr. Brené Brown, where she says that it's thinking that there's something wrong with ourselves, something faulty about ourselves, and therefore we're unworthy of belonging. And that unworthy of belonging is the real kicker in shame. And I think, you know, the grief is hard enough, and shame really takes it to a place of despair and isolation, in the way it disconnects us from ourselves and from each other, from our loved ones, our partners, and the people important to us. And so my hope with this breaking the silence that this movie, and you know, it's more than just a movie. This is a bigger thing than just a movie. The way that the conversation is being opened up now through this movie, and all the sideline projects and the community being built around it, that would really help to inoculate bereaved families against that experience of shame and feeling isolated and alone, that they would see enough of their own story in Maggie and Aaron and Arthur's story to know that they're not broken or sick or faulty or crazy or any of those things. It's very normal, the stuff that they're struggling with and finding difficult, and that there are places where they belong and where they can find compassionate community in the world, and that they can actually practically find that compassionate community through the compassionate community that is developing around this film. Because I think that's where grief, that's the kind of environment where grief turns into growth. when we have that type of compassionate community. So that's my desire, and I see it already happening with this film. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm so glad that you mentioned compassionate community, because my hope and my wish, now that Return to Zero has been gifted to the world, is that more conversations like this will happen. And I think conversations not just amongst people within, that the grief community, but sort of building that bridge between those who've had an experience like this and those who never have.
Yes.
And in ways that they probably never would have happened before. Yesterday I saw one of the things that Sean had shared on the Facebook page was a piece by Lifetime UK, and it was not an article, it was just directly a letter from the writer to her mother, remembering what had happened when she was younger. She remembered that her mother had lost a baby. She was 5 years old when it happened, and she remembered, obviously didn't know everything that was going on, but it was such a compassionate letter, and it's probably something that she would not have talked to her mother about or put out there publicly had this movie not come to be. So I think that for me, the wish is these conversations continue, because that's what builds that compassionate community. That's what provides understanding in others, and then sort of builds that bridge to the point that it comes together.
Yeah.
I think, you stole half of what I was going to say, Carrie.
Oh,
No, you should have gone first.
No, that's why we're the same person, because we just think the same. But no, in all seriousness, what the film gave to me was validation of my own journey. And I sat there and I watched it, and for the first time ever, just seeing Minnie Driver in that birth scene where the baby's just not coming out, because I don't know exactly, but I think it would be easier to give birth to a live child than what it would be to a baby who's not going to help in the process because they've passed away. So I remember that feeling of Christian just wouldn't come out, and it was at the point where he was going to have to be taken out. But and that is something that I don't think I've really thought about, what I actually went through in that moment in time. And Kylie and I spoke about it while I was staying at their house, and she said, I can't believe I actually did that. And I sat there with her and I said, you know what, I cannot believe I actually went through that either. And it was just so amazing to see it out there on screen for the whole world to see what it is like to give birth to a child that has passed away. And so for me, I hope that it validates everybody's journey, even if you haven't been through, the death of a child through stillbirth, but if they've died in early infancy, or if they've died in early pregnancy, whatever it is, I hope this movie validates your journey for you, so there is no shame there, and we should all be allowed to grieve however we like, because that's our right. So, but yeah, mainly, besides all about me, I would love for this to reach greater society. I would love people to contact their hospitals and say, please, someone needs to watch this, and you need to speak to your staff about it. If hospitals can be contacted, doctors, surgeons, wherever it is, this film needs to get out there. It is just as much as it is for the people in this community, it is for the people in the greater society as well, and they need to watch it. So that's my hope, is that it gets seen not just by our community, but by the greater society. I think we're going to wrap up now. But yeah, I just want to thank both of you ladies for coming on today. It's so lovely to meet you. Cath, what you've done with the discussion guide is probably, I don't think you'll understand how many people you're going to help with that. And not just today, like, this is going to be there forever. So the people that are going to, they're going to create their own healing journey. And that's what I loved about what you said before, that grieving people don't need to be told how to grieve. There's so many guidebooks and whatever that you should be doing at this stage and this stage. You will experience this, but who says you have to do that? Yeah. So I love that you said that out loud, because it's so true. And And I always say that this is your journey. You can write the story. You can do whatever you want with your own grief journey. It is yours. It is nobody else's. So I love what you did, Cath. And Karla,
thank you.
My goodness, I just think you're amazing. To meet Sean and Kylie in person and to see them speak so highly of you. And I just want to thank you for being the person that you are. And it's probably such a treat for everyone who's watched the film to actually meet the real doctor. Thank you.
Yeah, I always wanted to be tall, blonde, and yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful. So I hope that everyone who watched the film today, I'm sure there's going to be people who didn't like the film for whatever reasons, and that's okay. But what we have to look at here is the bigger picture. And the truth is that there is a great purpose behind this film. It is groundbreaking, and we will be, in 10 years' time, we will look back at this time and say that's when things started to change, and that's when more conversations started to happen, and that's when people were more accepted to grieve out loud, because we should be allowed to do that. And my hope is that in 10 years' time, everyone is just comfortable grieving out loud, because it should be allowed. Seriously, it's time. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. Carrie, I love you. You know that.
I love you too. Thank you.
It's such an honor that we can do this work together, and I hope that people can come and join us for our next series of healing conversations and interviews and talks. And we plan to really to go to places that not a lot of people have been willing to go to in the community so far. We want to open up a lot of different hard conversations and beautiful conversations. So thank you everyone for being with us tonight. If you're still feeling like you need to talk to someone, please visit the Return to Zero page. There's a lot of people there speaking about the movie, and there's a lot of grief support websites, Facebook pages that you can join and discuss how you're feeling. So please reach out to whoever you feel safest to speak to. But thanks for joining us, everyone.